I guess I'm just a very ordinary guy. I started my life when I was 4 years old. I wanted to be a farmer. I looked at my father as an outstanding individual. I wanted to be like my dad. And I guess that was great. I just went off to boarding school. I went through college. And every day that I was there, I was dreaming about getting old enough that I could leave and go farming. I loved rugby, and the rugby kept me at school, kept me reasonably happy. I'd be thinking about the next game while they were trying to teach me math. How did I get talking? That's an interesting story. I think I call myself a storyteller now. I did 46 years of farming, and my real only interest in life now is in growing human beings. I spent most of my life growing lamb, beef, crops, wool. But today my interest is in growing human beings. I had 5 years suffering depression. It was a horrible period of time. If you want to be a human being, you really need three basic things. You need hope. You need connection. And you need purpose. The man in front of you knows what it's like to live with no hope, no connections, and no purpose. A depression and a depressed person lives a miserable life. The reason I'm delighted to be able to speak to this group of people is you're all involved in parts of that process. And I hope that my talk now encourages you to pull tight together to grow capability in this nation. That you recognise the strength of all the arms of what you've presented this morning and how that can really kick on. As I said to you in the introduction, my talk today is completely unscripted. I don't know where it's going to go, but I thought it would be a good place to start by telling you how I got into speaking. I got involved in a science program. My problem had been that we got an 8-year drought. The three legs of our stool in farming, environmental, financial and social, broke. And I lived in the most broken area and I turned into the most broken man. I and a few other people got together and we organised this science project and it changed my world. And so that's the kind of stuff that you can be involved in as a group, as funders, as professionals and what have you. It's become legendary in New Zealand, and then I wrote a book and that sold over 20,000 copies and changed my life. I started to get invited. Doug, can you come to our area and talk about what happened and how you got on? At that stage of my life, I was talking nothing about the depression that I had suffered because I had seemingly sneaked through that period of time without disclosure. And so I was talking about what people perceived as the key element of my life's change, the fact that I'd started growing a different plant system which had enabled me to make money for a change even in dry conditions. It's incredibly successful and I've done a lot of work in Australia and in dryland New Zealand at changing those things. But one thing that followed on from that was requests to speak in all sorts of places. And one day I got a request, the phone went and a person who I'd never met before rang and said, Doug, could you come to Christchurch and do a presentation to a conference that we're running? It's on adaptation to climate change, and I'm organising it for the Royal Society of New Zealand. Now, an ingrained part of the man that stands in front of you, especially the new man that starts in front of you, is yes. So I said yes. And then I put the phone down. I realised I didn't even really know who I was speaking to. And so I went to my computer and I Googled the Royal Society of New Zealand. And it came up and it was a group of elite science professionals, mostly of whom had PhDs. I'd spent a bit of time talking to farmers and I was incredibly nervous immediately. What would I say? What could I tell them? And so I got stuck in and prepared a PowerPoint, and then hugely relieving a couple of days later, my son, a week or two later, my son, who was a young farmer at the time, came and said, "We've received an invitation to that conference you're talking about in Canterbury, Dad. I see you're on the speaker list. That's awesome." And so I immediately thought, wow, this is going to be good. You know, I'm going to have this opportunity to talk to science professionals and also some farmers. So I prepared this PowerPoint. I said to my wife, let's go and have a couple of days in Christchurch where it was being held, which was something we often did. We'll just have a wee break, do the presentation, and etc. I got to we stayed a night there, and I got up early in the morning, raced off to the conference centre. I got there, gave the lady doing the IT my pen, and walked into the conference. And I looked around, and it was solid PhDs, wall to wall. My heart started to beat. I was thinking, wow, I want to get my PowerPoint out. I need to change it. And then all of a sudden I realised I couldn't, and the conference was underway, and the first speaker got up and he talked about cumex of water moving through the deep Canterbury aquifer and nitrification of this, and there was graphs and all this sort of stuff, and it was very, very heavy. I was thinking, Doug, this is not going to go down well. Anyway, like I am today, I'm nearly always cast as the last speaker of the day. And eventually it came to my time. I was terrified. And I got up there, and I could see everyone was looking a bit tired and worn in the room, with each individual scientist trying to outdo the one before. And I got up and started presenting, and I could see immediately that the crowd were warming to me. And by the time I finished, I could feel the whole audience was in my hands, and I was having a great time. Ladies and gentlemen, I wrote that book, and when I first read that book, it came to me online. I sat on the computer. I had to read it, proofread it to see what was right and wrong. And I can tell you, I cried. I cried and I cried and I cried as I read about my own life. It was the first time that I'd had my up and down kind of life shown to me from a helicopter view. And when I finished it, I realised it was the best thing that I'd ever done. And I didn't care whether anyone else ever read it. I had no comprehension that a week after it was released, it would be New Zealand's best-selling non-fiction and go on that year to be New Zealand's biggest-selling non-fiction book in the year of release. I had no idea that that book would drag me around the world as it has. I'd already been working around the world speaking, and I had not realised the power of the written process. I'm staggered at where my life has gone. I spend quite a bit of my time speaking. I moved off the farm and bought a house where I could hide. Because when I came back from a speaking tour and I lived on the farm, the boys would come over and say, "Dad, can you come and help with this? Can you come and help with that?" I started to look at what I could contribute to the world. Was it more lamb? Was it more beef? Or was it people? I started to, particularly after analysing my book, started to understand a lot about how I'd been literally saved. In the depths of despair, a young junior from a grain merchandising company came to my farm. He said, "Doug, I want to take you to a seminar." And I said, "I'm too busy." And he said, "No, Doug," he said, "every time I come to your farm, I see you drifting into hell." I thought, "You cheeky little bugger, what do you know about me?" I said, "What's the seminar on?" He said, "It's about lucerne." I said, "Who's delivering it?" And he said, "Dr. Derek Moot from Lincoln University." I said, "We've been growing lucerne for 80 years. What could he teach me?" He said, "Doug, just 6:30 Tuesday morning, I'll pick you up." We drove the 2.5, 3 hours to the lecture, and 5 minutes into that lecture, I was feverishly asking for a pen and paper. 1 hour, 1 day, one man changed my life. I didn't know at that time, I couldn't see the journey, but he restored my hope. So if you want to be engaged in changing people like me and switching their light back on, don't tell them to reduce their vision. Help them to discover how they can do it. I've just been looking at the Take 5 banner down there. Absolutely the same stuff in New Zealand. The stuff that you're talking here today is the same stuff as we talk in New Zealand. The 5 points on there are absolutely the heart and soul of what happened to me. But I didn't know that at that time. I got involved in this science project. That took me to more learning. That started to open up my reconnection with other people. And so I endorsed the groups, rural support and all, to get beside people in this journey. In New Zealand, and I think I've heard it here, 1 out of 4 people, is that right, suffer mental illness. I got so involved in the rebirth of the dryland farming systems in New Zealand that I was starting to be asked, Doug, could you come and talk about this? I was going all over the place. People were flocking in to the halls to listen to Doug Avery talking about rebirthing my business. I was on radio every fortnight on a slot. I got the choice of what I spoke about. One day when I was coming down to do that radio presentation, I heard a woman talking about New Zealand's rural suicides and suicide in general. In New Zealand, we have twice as many take their own lives as we lose in road accidents. When we started talking about that, because we have such a preoccupation about stopping road accidents, we suddenly got shock horror. We weren't really talking about it. Here I was listening to a woman saying that the general population of New Zealand had 11 per 100,000 people suiciding, and farmers had 16. So the program was called The Country. It's nationwide, and it's run by a guy called Jamie Mackay, who is now a very good friend. Jamie said to me, Doug, what do you want to talk about today? And I said, I want to talk about suicide and depression. He said, Doug, are you sure? I said, I want to talk about me. He said, you've never been there, man. No, you play rugby and you're a happy guy. You haven't been there. You know, we know the drought was bad. I said, Bud, a couple of months ago, my wife said to me, during the depression, during the drought, Doug, the 8-year drought, the worst drought in recorded history in New Zealand, you suffered depression. I said, no, it wasn't that. And she said, Doug, it was. That's what you suffered. She said, I found a web page that had a questionnaire that had 25 questions on it. I want you to go through it with me. I've been through it. I want you to go through it, or I'm going to stand over you and make sure that you answer these questions correctly. And when I got to the bottom, there was only one I hadn't ticked in the right place to be well. We went to the little key at the side, and it said severe depression. You see, when I was in that place, my wife said to me, I want you to go to the doctor, Doug. I want you to get some help. And I would say to her, I am not the sick one. You are. You are the one that's doing the yelling, the shouting. And she's not in the room, but I don't know how that woman coped with me through that time. And I feel certain that if she hadn't, I wouldn't be here. I can't change where I went, but I can change where I go. It's made me passionate about sharing my story with people and growing capability. The world, ladies and gentlemen, is a journey of peaks and valleys. I've been on more than my share of peaks. As a young man, I was incredibly successful at rugby. If you were successful at rugby, you were always successful, because that was a benchmark in New Zealand. I was noted as a farmer. This guy's really amazing. But what I had not been trained by my father or mother, they were the most awesome parents. My father was a navigator in a Lancaster bomber and was awarded the DFC, survived 32 tours of ops. I was brought up in a strong Christian family. I had everything that I needed in terms of love, and I wasn't spoilt. I was a shiny little guy that thought that if I did everything right, I was going to have this awesome life. But 3 years into the drought, the thing that I attached to myself as being the most powerful thing, are you a good provider? Are you a decent man? Are you a farmer? I could look in the mirror and say, I'm none of those things. I was broken. I had no teaching of how to manage two things, my vulnerability and my shame. We all have shame. I'm too fat, I'm too old, I'm too young, I'm not acknowledged enough, I'm not educated enough, I'm not good enough. We all have shame. Part of the journey of creating a great world is to learn to manage your vulnerability and your shame. I had no skill in that. So I turned to alcohol. You see, if you don't know how to manage shame and vulnerability, you have to numb the pain. I needed something to numb me. We all do a little bit of numbing. Some people do a lot. We eat, we spend, we shop, we drug, we drink. I chose drinking, it was great. I never started till 5 o'clock, but then I'd look at my watch some days and think, Mexico, 5 o'clock, we're all right to go. The first one would be a bit of an escape, and the second one was fine, and the rest just ruined my hope, made sure that I had no out. And in New Zealand at that time, there was no support agencies unless you went to a mental health place. There was no empathy toward the fact that a human being might get into this position and could easily be saved. I'd been the chairperson of the Board of Trustees. I'd been a Lion on the Service Club of Lions for 18 years, including nearly every office in the place. I was on every committee and every board in the community, and as I couldn't cope, I stormed out of meetings, slammed the door, and shut myself away. No one came looking for me. From the view in the helicopter, as I read my book, I started to understand how this had happened. I started to understand that there were hundreds of people like me. And when I wrote my book, and every day since then, I've had an acknowledgement from somebody, sometimes multitudes of them, from men, from women, all over the world. I've read your book, thank you. It has had a core part of my heart. For a lot of men, they're like me, they don't read very well. In fact, there's an old story in New Zealand, there's 50% of farmers can't read properly, 20% of farmers can't write properly, and the other 85% can't add up properly. I'm a typical farmer. Academics weren't my thing. I just loved what I did. And here I was when that was knocked over, and this is the case with a lot, I had nothing there. The last 10 years of my life have been by far the most exciting of ever. I'm 64 years old. I suffered 5 years of depression. I've had, if you look at it that, 59 awesome years. That's okay. You'll be surprised to see me tell you now that I look at the best thing that ever happened to me in my life was my 5 years of broken. Because I was an untrainable beast until I actually got smashed. And then one day, one man and one group started the journey of rebuilding my hope. I've become very good at one-on-one building hope. I've got an extremely high success rate. I want to tell you a little bit about how I do that. I get a ring typically from a wife. She'll say to me, Doug, Ted's broken. I say, what do you mean broken? She'll say, he's sitting in the chair crying and I can't get anything out of him. I've felt him going, leaving me for a couple of months. I had no idea until this morning and he's cracked. And she said, we've had a fair old go. And I said to her, do you want me to come around now? This is my friend. And she said, no, I've booked him in at the doctor. And I said, great, take him to the doctor, I'll come tomorrow. So I get there the next day, and by that stage he's been medicated. He's calmer, but he's still my mate that I've sailed Cook Strait with probably 20 or 30 times, the tough man that I've known that can change the front sail in the middle of Cook Strait in 50 knots of northwest wind with waves coming over the front. The guy that I've trusted for so long, he's still bursting into tears at points of the conversation. And I say to them, I've got 5 sheets of paper here and I'll place them on the table. And I want you to write down the 5 things that are bothering you, worrying you the most. And Ted looks at me and says, Doug, I need 10 sheets of paper. And I say, no, I'm going to work with you quietly to get it down to 5. After about 40 minutes, we've got it down to the 5. He's written down the things that are absolutely tearing his brain to bits. And I say to him at that point, which is the worst one? And he'll immediately just point, and this happens every time, that one there, Doug, that's by far the worst. And I'll look at him and say, are the other 4, are they urgently needed to be attended to this week? Because if they are, I will arrange to do something with that. You and your wife, all you're going to do for the rest of the next 7 to 10 days is you're going to concentrate on that one thing. And so I quietly and in front of him in full view, sweep up the other 4 papers, fold them over, put them in my back pocket. I will look after those. You will now look after just this one thing. And you can see their face lift. I just got one thing to lift. Because I think when you think about a broken mind, and I know what mine was like, it's like taking the top off a spaghetti can with tomato sauce in it. You can see the spaghetti everywhere. You can feel the heat from the tomato sauce. It's just a mess. And what that exercise does is it's like a bad hair day, like I have most of the time. It's like getting the hair organised. And I say, just that one thing. Don't have any thoughts about the other stuff. If you think all of a sudden something there needs to be attended to, let me know and I'll be there. I ring in 7 days. How are you going? We're doing really well, Doug. 9 days later, I go back. I have the 4 other sheets in my pocket. How's it going with the first thing? And nearly every time they'll say, we've got that sorted. So a broken person has got all this emotion going over everything. They are feeling completely immobilised with the amount of energy that's going through their brain. Their brain is going round and round and round like that. And the secret it is, for somebody who's just going into this sort of place, and that's where this helps the most, is to start to cause a break in the confusion. Now I can tell you that guy has gone on, bought another farm, put in a massive great wattage storage dam, and put in about 200 acres of Sauvignon Blanc grapes. I don't let people stop there. I say to them once they've actually started to get on top of the problem, don't stop until you have the toolkit that I have, that knows when you're in dangerous territory, that knows how to deal with it, and you know before you start that the life is a journey of peaks and valleys. Each of us has a journey of peaks and valleys. We all love peaks. The day we bought our farm, the day we got married, the day we graduated from university. But everybody that's been on a peak must go into a valley. I'd never been taught to manage my valleys. To me now, I welcome my valleys. I want to go back to a valley because valleys are awesome places. They're firstly places where you can rest and relax. So if you've created a schedule, and I got an email this morning from a guy like this, told me his life's in crisis. That's the sort of first line that I get. If you've created a life where you can't go to a valley and rest and relax and regenerate, you need to address it. But the other awesome thing that happens in valleys is there are places where you rebirth the next climb to a peak. It's where you integrate in the next learning process. So Doug Avery never concentrates on achieving peaks. I concentrate on mitigating and minimising the depth of my valleys.